static HTML. One of the big problems with static HTML is you do a request, it generates it and gives it to you. Any little change at all, it needs to regenerate that full file, send it back to you, and you have to re-render it. You're going to get really sluggish response times. And so a lot of frameworks look at how do we overcome that? How do we render things that are interactive and responsive? React is currently the most popular framework for this. Okay, there's lots of different ones that can do the same thing. And you can actually do it with just straight JavaScript. It's painful though. And so what you have is all different people from different companies. What they've done is they've made their own little custom frameworks that will do this very well. Now, Node.js is part of the foundation of this, but that's not a big deal, understanding the history of the hierarchy of it. What React is doing is rather than taking this HTML that's generated and repopulating your DOM, you understand what your DOM is? Your document object model. So that's the stuff you see on your page. Instead, what it does is it maintains a virtual DOM, meaning it keeps track of the DOM in RAM, and it only re-renders what changes. Now, that's not really going to affect what I'm teaching you today. Okay, it explains why this is popular, why this matters. You're getting efficient, responsive reactions from your web pages. That's why people like React. The name, as it implies, makes it more reactive. Now, it's developed by Facebook, now maintained by Meta, obviously. But again, that doesn't really matter. A lot of people are picking up on it and using it. Okay, so it's pretty easy to set up React on your own local server if you want to, but I'm just going to take it real simple and we're going to go to Replit, okay? Because what I want to focus in is what's the basic syntax here? How do we get things working with React? How do we go from 0 to hero with this? Okay. Okay, so we have our basic Replit here. Please tell me you're all on Replit. I really can't see your screens this way. But yes, you're on Replit, create. And obviously in Replit, I want you to look for React. And I'm using just basic JavaScript, but you can use with TypeScript if you want to. And React 1, okay. It's like my hello world version of using React. Now on Replit, it's going to kind of generate your basic project using your basic structure for you. And I'm going to go over what these things are. And typically when you do start, you do want to use this template. It's a good template. Okay, but here you are at your index.html. Now, hopefully you've seen basic indexes before. And I'm not really going to care what's in the head. There's some metadata there that I don't particularly care about. Okay, the body. This is our standard React body. There's nothing in it. Okay, what I have a single div. Its ID is root. That is React's standard way of doing things. You don't have to call it root, but everyone does, so you will too. Okay, so one div called root, that's normal. And of course, hopefully you know at this point that your JavaScript should always be the last thing in your body. You don't import your JavaScript first, okay? Your JavaScript's going to refer to things that are on the page. They have to be on the page before you can refer to them. Now you'll notice something here. It's not called, it's pretty common to call it index.js for your main, index.js for your main JavaScript. React likes to call it main.jsx. Okay, we do have to talk about that X. I will shortly. Quite frankly, if you called it .js, it would work exactly the same. Okay. So if we look at our main, so I tell you that this is a page that is being rendered with JavaScript. Okay, so my main.jsx, this is JavaScript. I'm going to reduce this a little bit. This React strict. Just don't breathe on her shoulder. It's weird.
If you don't mind, that'd be great.
Okay. React strict is for debugging reasons. It gives you better feedback. I'm going to delete that just so that you can see what's going on here. And I'm going to reduce this all the way down to, I'm actually going to delete the .app, the app. Okay, so what I'm doing here, what React does, the main thing it does is it renders. It's really ideal for single page websites. Okay, so what it's doing, I'm going to just put H1, hey, not angle bracket. What? Am I in French mode or something? Angle bracket, there we go. H1, hello, React. Exclamation mark, because I'm pretty excited to do React. Okay, so what it's doing is, it takes this and it renders it to my root. Now you might be saying, sir, I thought you said you were doing JavaScript. What the heck is this HTML doing there? Yeah, I'll get to that in a second. Click run so you can see it's actually going to work. Hello, React. Okay, what this is, this magic, this is JSX. JSX. Have you heard of it? Okay. It's short for JavaScript XML. And so what it allows me to do is, while I'm doing JavaScript, just add HTML looking code. I say looking code because sometimes things that you get away with in your regular HTML is going to say, no, you're not following exact protocol. That's not going to work. But basically what it's saying is, now, what actually happens under the hood is a bunch of stuff. Okay, so it actually is doing, it's creating a node, it's rendering the H1 to it. Okay, so there's a number of JavaScript steps that actually happen that you'd have to do in old school. But JSX says, okay, let's just combine the two. So it looks like I'm just putting HTML on my JavaScript. Okay, now, when you're using your React DOM render, it can only render one thing. So if I, for example, want to do a paragraph here, I say, well, I'm pretty excited by this, so I'm going to say paragraph, yeah, whatever. I am going to be very good at this. Okay. Now you'll see nothing happens. Now it's not because React says, I don't think you're gonna be good at this. I told you a second ago, you can render one thing, one component. And by having two, it says, no. How do I make my two into one? How do you take two things and make them as like the one thing in HTML? What if you wanted to have them both turn red? What would you use? No? But how would I target both of these things? Group them together.
Oh.
I could use a class, I guess. That seems like overkill though. Div. A div, right? Okay, so a common way to do this is say, hey, let's make this a div. So I open the div here and I close the div there. Close the div there. Okay. And now I have one thing, hey, P. Okay, there we go again. Now I have this as one thing. Okay, now, one of the cool things, let me just sidetrack about JSX. Now, JSX allows you to break out and do JavaScript again. So, okay, so here, as soon as I start this tag, I'm saying I'm breaking out from doing JavaScript and I'm doing HTML. While I'm breaking out doing HTML, I can say, but I kind of want to go back and do JavaScript again. And all I do to do that, let's supposing I have const year equals 2024. Okay, so what I want to say is I'm going to be very good at this by year. So to access that, all I do is use curly brackets. Year. Hey. Pardon? I thought that would work. It's supposed to work. Okay, I have to get back to that. Why did I fail to break out? Don't think so. Okay, blah, blah, blah. Oh, it likes you and it doesn't like me. That makes more sense. So that's an example of do as I say, not as I do. Okay. So obviously I have a bug somewhere. I just don't see it. Whatever. It doesn't like me. What's it actually saying? Huh? Maybe because the error doesn't match what's on my screen. Whatever. React is trying to make fun of me, you jerk. Okay. So one of the key things you do in React is you make your own custom components. Okay, so one of the key things for React is to organize your code. Oh, yep. Oh. One thing I forgot to mention. One of the key reasons for, just to back up for a second, one of the key reasons to use React is backwards compatibility. Now, whenever you're doing any web page stuff, you're always concerned, well, what if the person who's trying to go to my website has an older version of JavaScript? Because you may know that like ES6, which is the new version of JavaScript, has a lot of new features. And even JSX is a new feature. So what if they don't have it? Well, incorporated into React is this feature called Babel. Babel, what it does is it renders all of this code to older compatibility stuff, okay? So it actually backwards compatibilities everything automatically. So anyone, no matter how old their version of JavaScript is going to see it correctly. And that's a big deal because otherwise you're saying, well, this code looks great, but only 70% of the people are going to see it correctly. 100% of the people are going to see yours correctly as long as they have JavaScript enabled. That's all they need to see it correctly. And that's a big deal. Okay, so one of the key reasons to use React is the ability to make your own custom components. And so we have one here. As you can see, we have this import app from app. Okay, this is making a custom component. So I'm going to take this app.js and I'm going to erase this main that they have. I don't like it. And I'm going to go back to my main. I'm going to say, I want this to become its own custom component. And so I cut that, go back to my app.js and paste it. Okay, I'll get to that syntax in a second. And so what I'm rendering here is app. So hopefully you know a bit of JavaScript to recognize, or a bit of HTML to recognize that if you have a tag that doesn't have a closing, you should be putting this at the end of it. Now, you might say to me, yeah, sir, you may not realize that I put BR all the time and I don't put that slash. Yeah, that's good for you. And your browser will ignore that and figure out, oh yeah, you mean this. JSX is not that forgiving though. If you don't put it correctly, it won't render it, okay? So you have to do it correctly. Okay, and so what's going on here is React allows me to make a component that looks like a regular component. It looks like this is an image or this is its own unordered list. All the kind of stuff you use in HTML, you're making your own custom one. Naming convention, what you do is you just capitalize it. So you know, okay, this is mine. This isn't something that someone else made. This isn't on some HTML list somewhere. This is my own app. Naming convention using React is you'll make your main app should be called app. We're going to make our own custom component from there and break down our app, but let's look at app. What does it look like? Okay, well, it is just, so I'm returning all this stuff. Now, if all I was returning was a single hello, I wouldn't need these round brackets. If you're doing multiple lines, you're gonna need those round brackets. Let's advance past the div. Truth is, if I erase the div part, it still groups them together. Does anyone know what that's called in JavaScript? It's called a fragment. It's considered preferred style over the div in this case, because I'm not using the div to organize what's on the page. I'm not trying to necessarily make it go from inline to block. I just want to group this stuff together. So fragment is the preferred style to do that. Okay, so there's my, hey, let's do that instead. Oh, oops. My constant had better be part of my app if I'm going to see it. Okay. And there we go. I'm back to my same ordering of this. Okay, so this is my main app. I'm returning a heading, a paragraph. Okay, so I want to add my own custom component. What does it look like? And so what you want to do when you're making your custom components is you want your app to look clean. If you're scrolling down 5 pages of stuff, it's difficult to follow. And so React is designed with a way to make custom components very easily. So all I'm going to do is say, okay, add file. And I'm going to say what's going to come next is my plan. Okay, my plan. Blank. Okay, so you might want to, you can go to my room and grab that laptop that you gave back to me that has McKenzie and tape on it.
Okay, sure.
That'll still work.
All right. Great.
Okay, and so I have to first import React. And so if you haven't played around with imports in JavaScript, you might be like, well, I don't know what that looks like. Just go back to your app there. That looks like this. Import React from React. So my plan, which is going to be its own custom component, import React from React. Okay. Oh, my plan, sorry. It better have an extension, otherwise it's not going to know what the freak it is. You can call it .js or JSX. I'm going to do JSX. I prefer that. Yep.
Sorry, how do you create plan?
Sorry, in files there, just add file.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So call it plan.jsx. Okay, so import React from React. And all I need to do, earlier versions of React were harder. You had to make your own custom class to make a component. It's very easy now. You just make a function with that name and return the value. That's it. Okay, and so function plan. Again, caps, because it's a component. And I'm just going to return. I'm going to put multiple things in there. So I'm going to do round bracket here, semicolon at the end there. As you may know, JavaScript is very forgiving if you don't put semicolons. I try to put them anyways. There are very few cases when the code will actually change its function if you don't have a semicolon. If you're just starting off, you're not going to hit those cases. So if you decide that you're never going to put a semicolon in, except for doing for loops, like it'll still work. Don't worry about it. Okay, anyways, our plan. So I guess plans should be ordered lists. And so what is my plan? Oh, I don't know. I guess the first thing you're going to do in your ordered list is go to McKenzie's workshop. That seems like a pretty good start. Pay attention. Okay, we're well on the way to becoming experts at React. And then obviously, code 3 hour. What? 3 hours every day. I feel like the third part of that is more work than the other two. Okay. So I had this custom thing called plan, and all I do, I return that. Now, I want to be able to export it from here so I can import it to my app, and that is export default. Now you can export multiple things, but you should have one thing that is the default thing you're exporting. And what I'm exporting is plan. Okay, so this is able to be imported now. So from my app, I'm going to say import plan from /plan. You actually can leave the dot. I think I'm supposed to lowercase that. Okay. And there we go. After my P here, I'm simply going to say, okay, put in a plan. We have our basic component going. Got your plan. I should have made it clear. Laptop retired. You can borrow a school laptop. You can see. You can move your desk if you want to decide.
Yeah, on YouTube. It's on YouTube as well. Oh, it is? Oh. But, I thought you wanted to code as well. Oh.
We all have this. So plan.
Here, I'll watch it on
A
YouTube.
couple little bugs here and there.
Yeah, it's
What do you got?
so just on the MasseyHacks.
What's the year? Tell me where is it? App.jsx 4.7.
Oh, okay.
You can run laptop.
Oh,
Mine's close.
and then, oh, right here. Thank you.
Is your plan called JSX or JS? Huh? JSX?
You know what?
Okay, we have the basics. Okay. So that's making your own custom component there. Okay. Now, we can make our components so it can take in our own properties. And again, for time reasons, it'd be nice to start fresh and do a new thing. For time reasons, I'm just going to add on to this one if you're okay with that, as long as yours is working. And I go to my plan, I'm going to say, okay, with my plan, or here, with my plan component, I want to be able to pass in my fourth option here. So I'm going to say fourth equals I don't know, go to school. I think that's helpful. Okay, now, what happens with these properties, these attributes here, they get passed in, and if I go to my plan here, any amount of properties I add simply get passed into my parameter here. Everyone calls it props, short for properties, I think. Not like props. Okay, and so I call it fourth. And so what I'm going to see here, add a new list item. To get at this, it's props dot fourth. But okay, hang on. I'm inside HTML, and so I have to break out and say, well, no, I want some JavaScript stuff. Otherwise, it just says props dot fourth, right? Curly brackets, curly brackets. And now we're picking up that go to school. This allows us to make these custom. Okay. Doing a bit of styling with React. It's important to recognize when you're styling with React, you do not apply, here's my app, this plan here. I cannot add a class here. This will not work. If I add a class here, what that'll do is it'll pass in props.class as this. Okay, it will not make it a class that I can target with CSS. It will not do that. So I have to, in my, okay, so I want my plan to be targetable, give it its own class. I go to my plan. So in the actual JavaScript somewhere, okay, so it's all an unordered list. It makes sense that I could say, now there's a weird thing. Again, this is JSX. It's not actually HTML. Instead of saying class, it becomes class name. So I'm going to say class name equals plan list. Okay. Now you may be familiar with signed out. Someone done signed in on another device?
On Zoom?
Yeah. Yeah, I don't get your plan of having one account that people sign in on. There should be one account that's always in, and anyone who logs in should just give me co-host abilities. That's all I need. Right? You don't need to have a thing passing around. So I don't, you want to get me back in here because you just signed me out. We just dropped the Zoom feed.
I think maybe, oh, is that on Zoom feed now? Or is it still on? Okay.
You still see my screen?
Yeah.
Okay, is the screen moving?
Yep.
Whatever. Okay, it says it signed me out. It didn't sign me out. I'll buy that. Sure. Okay. So again, this is actually JSX. It's not straight Java, straight HTML. So your class becomes class name instead. Hopefully you're a little familiar with CSX. Let me just make it red so I can prove that I'm modifying something here. So again, dot, what did I call it? Plan list. And I'm going to do the most basic modification, color red. Okay. And it turns red, no big surprise. Okay, your other way of doing your styling, you can do inline. But when you do inline, you assign it as a JavaScript object instead. Okay, so without getting too lost in that, suppose in the last one I want to be like color green, style equals, so it becomes a JavaScript object. Now, I'm in JSX, I'm in HTML, I want to go to JavaScript, it's there, I want to be JavaScript object, I need a second one of those. So color colon green. Now, this may seem weird that I would do this. I'm not going to show you an example of this, but the advantage of doing it this way is I can make an object where I assign as the style. I can change the object dynamically, and it will update the style. So typically when you're doing HTML, CSS, you frown on inline CSS because it's not as nice as having everything on your style sheet. One of the reasons why you will do that in React, you can make an object, give it an initial style, dynamically change the properties in the style, and it will update on the fly. And so that is a useful reason why you would use inline styling. Okay, but I don't want to get too lost in the styling. Okay, so commonly what you're doing here in these in these plans is you're rendering a list. Like I say, you're typically getting from a database, you're getting a whole list of things. So you're typically dynamically rendering these rather than statically rendering them as I have. I'm not going to access a database to get my data. I'm just going to put these into a list and show you how I would dynamically render them. Okay. So here, my plans, I guess, let's be more proper. Oh, even most proper. Const plans equals, okay, I'm just going to turn these into an array of strings. Okay, so that hey, went French on me. Come on, stop being French. And I'm not in the, okay. So again, I just change it, so I put them into an array instead. And what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna generate these. Any idea what I'm gonna use? I'm gonna use black magic. Okay, so if you haven't been up to date on JavaScript, you might find this to be a little bit confusing. So plans.map. So I'm going to take each plan and I'm going to map it onto, plans.map is JavaScript. So I need curly brackets around that to say, hey, it's JavaScript time. And I'm going to map that onto li p, and I think that needs to be in curly as well. Yes. Okay. I'm going to guess that hurts some heads. I'm going to guess I need to explain this a little bit before that makes sense to you. Show of hands, how many look at that and think, oh yeah, ES5, no problem. How many look at that and think, I have no idea why the brackets are where they are? Okay, that's kind of normal. And, oh, I can't do that. I'm going to lose my online people. Okay. Okay. So what this is taking, what map is taking, it is taking in a function and it's applying it to each of these elements and generating the results. Okay, so maps a function onto each of these. Now, this notation here, this is like saying, oh, let's function list item takes in some value and returns okay. That's what this is. Oh. Okay. Now, so the parameter map's taking in is a function. So list item is my function. Now, there's a couple different ways to make functions in JavaScript. I could say that, let's just say list I equals function that takes in a value and returns this. Okay, so I can do it that way. That's one way of doing it. Okay, the truth is, I can use what's called arrow notation. Arrow notation just specifies, okay, my function that returns a value is that. That's the short version of it. That's an arrow notation function. Okay. This says this is a function, takes a parameter and returns this. And so if you start doing React at all or see React online, you're not going to see old school functions. You're not. You're going to see arrow notation functions. And so I want you to see it now. So when you see it for real, you're not confused. Okay. You're going to almost always see them that way. This is how it's done. No one does this way anymore. Not no one, but no one outside of this room. Okay. Now, the last basic concept you need before you feel like you've scratched the surface of React is this thing called using hooks. Okay, I'm gonna start a brand new one. And so I'm gonna go here, create. React hook. Oops. Blah, 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 blah. Okay, so we're gonna accept the basic setup here, go right to the app and delete that main thing here. Okay, so there's a number of different hooks. Easily the most useful and common is called use state. Okay. Yeah, this might bug you too. It's new. Const. Color. Set color equals use state red. Okay. Okay, let's start off with return. I'll do a fragment and H1. I like color. Who doesn't? Who doesn't like color? Okay. Oh, which problem? Did I mess something up here?
You got import.
Oh, yeah. Sorry. Yeah. Thank you. Okay. So, right, the error didn't say anything. Okay. So use state actually has to be imported. And so the way you do it, so it's coming from React as well, but it's not the default coming from React. So I think it's the comma first, right? Yep. Comma, curly bracket, use state. Thank you very much. Okay. Now, two things you understand. This notation here, you've probably seen it if you've done Python. It's the same idea. I'm passing back two things here, and it gets passed to each of them. Okay, so use state generates two things. It generates a variable and a setter method. But this is a magical setter method. What happens is, whenever I access this setter, it tells React to update the DOM. Okay, so just changing it is all I need to do to automatically re-render the value that's in color. Okay, and that's a big deal. Okay, so I'm going to add something that allows me to change from red to blue, and we'll just put a button there. Okay, so let's say we have button. And again, we are, well, let's give the type first, I guess. Type equals button. We're doing JSX, so the property doesn't become on click. Instead, we camel case. So it's on click with a capital C equals, and I'm just going to do again I'm going to do an anonymous function here using the arrow notation. And I'm just going to use that set color setter method. And I'm going to set it to, we'll go red. And so obviously that's whoops. That stuff's inside button, obviously. And then it's going to say red. And then copy, paste, change this to blue and this to blue. Okay. So again, inside the button tag itself, I have type equals button, on click equals. Again, you quickly start to get used to these arrow functions. This is saying this is a function, takes in no parameters. And what it does is it calls set color red. Okay. Capitalizes it there. Okay. So just by virtue of calling that method, it updates it automatically. Now, I think we have time for, well, we have lots of time. Okay. So I'm going to take this and I'm going to say, I want to track my history of red, blue, back and forth. Okay. And so I'm going to say, history, set history. And oh, by the way, that the parameter you pass in here is the starting value, if that wasn't obvious. Equals use state. And what I'm going to pass in here is a blank list. Okay. Now, what I'm going to do when they click, I'm going to set the color and do something else. And because I want two things here, I think I'm going to need curly brackets, set color red, and then I want to add on to my history. So when I set history, well, it's going to be history plus that another red, right? Concat red. Okay. I think that looks right. That's the on click. Why is it mad at me? Set history. Oh, I can't spell uses state. Use state. There we go. Red. Okay. And now I'm just going to do the same thing with my blue. So it's a multi-line. So I need curly brackets there to add the second line. And I need to set history, and that is history.concat blue. Okay. How can I possibly render a list of things? How could I render a whole list? What should I use? Here, let's use a unordered list. How about that? How can I get those list items? I'm testing for retention here. I have a list of things and I want to render all my list items all at once using one magical command. It's map. Div allows me to group things together. Map allows me to apply the function to each of them. And so what I'm going to do here is I'm going to say history.map. And so I'm taking this color and rendering it as a list item. No. List item. H. And I done messed something. Oh, this is using JavaScript inside of HTML. So I have to break out and say it's JavaScript time. Okay. Oh, I messed something up still. Nope, just took a while. And there we go. Okay, now, one of the things you're going to struggle with when you're doing this is when you need the curly brackets and when you don't. You have to remember, if you're doing any kind of angle bracket stuff, you're in JavaScript and you said, I want to do HTML. So JSX goes into kind of the HTML mode. When you want to do JavaScript from there, you need curly brackets again to do the JavaScript. Okay, and you can do HTML inside your JavaScript, inside your HTML, but you can inception it if you want to, but it becomes more painful. Try and avoid that. Like you have JavaScript, HTML, JavaScript again, that's probably deep enough. Okay, any questions about this stuff? That's, I think, as much as your brain's can handle for this lesson. Okay, so let's go over the basics. We use React because it allows very responsive control of the DOM. It allows your website to be snappy, reactive. Okay, it does this by maintaining a virtual DOM. It means your DOM's in memory, and it also maintains a difference tree actually, so it knows which ones have changed. Only update those. An important part of React is Babel, which allows it to automatically put it in the older version of JavaScript. So you're getting compatibility with old browsers. That's a compelling reason to use React. In terms of React, you're encouraged to make your own custom components, each being relatively small. What you don't want is 100 pages of code on one page. That's considered poor React style. Instead, you make your custom components, you make them small, manageable, and you have a bunch of different components. From there, it's important you understand the fundamentals of JSX. They're not that hard. All it's saying is, hey, you can use HTML looking code inside your JavaScript. It's HTML with a few exceptions. Okay. The most important thing here is this use state. This is powerful. There are a bunch of different hooks that you use in different situations. If you want a side effect, you use effect instead. I will give one final warning here. If you don't know what you're doing with this, you can easily cause infinite recursion here. If your use state causes use state can trigger a re-rendering of itself, so infinitely. Okay, so you have to be careful with use state and all these hooks. But just be warned, if you don't know what you're doing, you can get infinite recursion. So you shouldn't be using ifs or there's other things inside of there. So typically you want to embrace this functional notation I'm showing you. Functional notations are good because they will avoid side effects. Okay, they simply generate a result. Any questions about all this stuff? It's not hard to do it offline. If you go to install React locally, you can find that. It's like, if you've done any like node stuff, it's just like an npm install React, and then you make npx create React app, and it makes the basic React app for you. You can do that. It'll run on your local host 3000, just like most Node.js stuff will. Yeah, to really get power out of this, you do want to start using a backend from a database to generate this data that you're actually rendering. If you are interested in React and you want to know who the professional is here, Anish Agarwal is the man. Okay, he's currently working with React at an actual company. And so if you have any deep questions, he's the guy. I'm just finger painting with React. Okay, I'm not an artist. Okay. And that concludes the session on React. This is when you clap. There we go. There we go. Now, do you want me to log out for the sake of this or just,
Just log out. Thank you, sir.
so end
Uh,
the meeting for all?
uh,
Yes?